It is officially the month of March, and that means championship time in the world of college sports. But I'm pretty sure when I said that, you immediately thought of March Madness, which means college basketball. Because that sport has figured out that people want to see the best teams go at it in games that actually matter, where it's basically win or go home. But the only thing they love even more than that is a good upset, when a small team that you've likely never heard of is able to go out there and beat one of the giants. But college track and field also has a national championship that goes off in the month of March. And when the NCAA indoor meet goes off, I'll be honest, the results are going to be pretty predictable. Just consider that Arkansas on the women's side has won 4 of the last 5 national championships, and going into this one, they're still ranked number 1 in the nation. And the real reason why we don't see upsets in college track and field is because we don't actually let the best teams go out there and battle it out. Don't get me wrong, we have conference championships where teams have to go out there with everybody on their roster and let the chips fall, because you can't hide on the scoreboards anymore behind one talented athlete. If your roster is not ready to put up numbers, you are going to get beat. It's honestly the most exciting time in college track and field, both for the athletes who compete in it and for the fans who actually watch it. But during most of the regular season, the meets are unscored, and for the championship meets, we don't actually take the best teams. We just select out the best athletes. I'm not saying that the best athletes shouldn't get to compete, but when you get to a point where college coaches can basically hack the system and go after a few national caliber athletes, not even try to win a conference title because there's really no point in it, and just hope that those 4 or 5 kids can ride their way to a national title, which has actually been pulled off more times than you realize, it does seem pretty clear to me that we are missing an opportunity. And I have had enough of it, which is why I took it upon myself to rank the best teams. Every single team in Division I college track and field. Ranking those teams from top to bottom. Because we already have all the data that we actually need to figure out who has the best ones. And the conference championship meets are when the athletes actually go out there and prove it. Now I could tell you how I do it. You take conference, regional, and national ranking indexes, and you mix it together with a whole bunch of math, but I'm sure you really don't care about any of that, so I won't bore you. But if you really want to see my ranking list for the best college teams on both the women's and the men's sides, then I will put a link to it in the description below. So I apologize in advance because this video is a little bit different, because I actually care about track and field, specifically at the college level, and I want to see the sport thrive. And right now, we are in a very uncertain time, specifically when it comes to college track and field, and nobody knows what the future is. The one thing that we do know is that the CEO of the sport has said himself that we need to get to a place where we have competitions with very real stakes and very clear narratives. So I'm not just going to rank the best teams anymore. I'm going to rank them and then tell you what we do with them. March Madness for college track and field. And along with all the odds and percentages, I'm even going to use a random number generator to determine which teams are going to make it onto this track and field bracket. I guess you can call it a bracket to some degree for how it's going to function. And we're going to figure out who could have been the regional championship qualifiers as well as the national championship qualifiers. And of course, who would be the national champion if all the teams really went at it. Because if you win a conference championship in Division I, it should mean one thing: win and you're in, because that's how March Madness is done. Starting this off on the men's side, I probably should remind you that in 2024, Texas Tech won the NCAA Indoor Championship meet. And outdoors, Florida Gators won it all again, because that's what they do. But to put it in perspective, when the Florida Gators came back to the SEC Conference Championship this year indoors, they finished in last place in the SEC. I'm not making this up. It doesn't mean that their team isn't good right now, but it does mean that when you actually go out there with your entire roster and battle against everybody else, specifically in that conference, you can definitely take some hits, and that's what happened to the Gators. So when I tell you we are going to figure out the best teams, I really mean exactly that. And in college sports, most people care about the national ranked top 25. So looking at my team rankings, I'm going to break down which teams actually made it into the top 25 before I get into how you get on the bracket in the first place. Because remember, if If you win your conference championship, you're automatically getting a bid. But what those teams are also going to have to do to survive and advance into the national championship meet. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. And I'm Coach Rob, the founder of SCArecruiting.com, where I rank the best track and field recruits across the entire nation. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section, because I try to read them all. So as far as the power conferences are concerned, you should have expected that they would likely have multiple teams inside the top 25. And that is exactly what happened. But the breakdown isn't exactly what you might have thought, because the Big 12 only has 2 teams that pound for pound rate amongst the best in the nation. The ACC, on the other hand, has 3 teams, and the Big 10 joined them with 3. But the difference is that all of theirs crack inside the top 10. And when it comes to the SEC, yes, they are still the best conference in all of college track and field. That's why they have 5 teams inside the top 25. Just remember, there are about 30 conferences in Division 1. I will address all the teams that make the top 10, and specifically those inside the top 5. But among the rest of the top 25, here are the bullet points for the teams you didn't see coming. Grand Canyon University, out of the WAC conference. The same Grand Canyon that has Aaron Brown. Yes, the Aaron Brown sprinting for them. That team cracked the top 25. They won the WAC conference, which is part of the reason why they did it. But yes, they are legitimate from top to bottom. The Big East actually produced 2 top teams. Villanova is one of them. But UConn cracked the top 10. Because they are really that legit. They beat up on that conference as well as their region. And these rankings are primarily based on who did you play and who did you beat. Northern Arizona, out of the Big Sky, cracks the top 20 as well. But when it comes to the Ivy League, all you need to know is that Harvard is one of 2 teams from their conference to make it inside the top 20. And I'm going to get to the other one in a moment, because they cracked the top 5. Teams like High Point, Youngstown State, and Navy all beat up on their conferences as well, while still holding their own across their entire regions. That's why they make it so high. But New Mexico, out of the Mountain West, is perhaps the other shocker inside the top 10. They finished number 8, but they're one of 2 teams from the Mountain West that got this far. Colorado State is the other one, but they're all the way back near number 20. But I told you that the Ivy League had one more team you needed to know. So here we go with the top 5, because at number 5 is Princeton. Not just out of the Ivy League, but the Mid-Atlantic. And they busted up both of those. That's how they got this far. Pound for pound, you don't want to go against the Princeton Tigers this season in a dual meet. But the next 4 teams I'm going to give you are basically the usual suspects. At number 4, it's Texas A&M out of the SEC. They have talent to compete amongst the best of the best anywhere you would put them. That's why they made it this far. But they're just not the best team in the SEC, although it's close. And the men of USC sneak past them for the number 3 spot, because having multiple collegiate leaders will do that for your team. And then there was the defending champion Texas Tech Red Raiders. They get the number 2 spot because, well, when you know how to use the transfer portal, you always have enough talent to beat just about anybody else in the nation. But the number 1 team on this list is the same one that I think has the best recruiting of anybody in the NCAA. It's the Arkansas Razorbacks. They did get upset at the SECs, which is a very big deal, and I'll even get to why in a moment. But ultimately speaking, if you're really going to go at it, pound for pound, against anybody across the nation, you could always do well to keep picking the Razorbacks. But I also told you that these rankings weren't just for kicks. In a college track and field world that wants to have competitions with very real stakes, I propose that we just go all in and keep the same energy of March Madness. Simply put, when it comes to the national championship push, I would do it this way. We already have 9 regions across the country in Division 1. Up until now, we really don't use those rankings for anything across those regions. They literally qualify you for nothing. So let's just change that equation and allow them to qualify you for the national meet. So I propose that we do an indoor regional meet before the national championships, and the teams that show up there and show out will earn their right to compete for the title. If you win a conference championship anywhere in Division 1, For my purposes, if you win, you get in. You get invited to whatever your region actually is. That's an auto bid that's going to get taken from somebody else who might have stole a spot. And you're going to give out at-larges to all the remaining teams in those regions that rank on the top of those polls that did not win a conference meet. The only catch is you ain't going to do the same amount of teams in every region, because all the regions don't have the same number of teams. So for every 5 teams in your region, or a number that rounds up to 5, your region will receive 1 bid. So if you have 35 teams in your region, that's going to be 7 bids to the regional. See how that goes? The only catch is that the best teams in the nation, the top 4 teams in the nation, specifically on these team rankings, those teams are getting at-large bids that take them straight to the NCAAs. They don't have to qualify out because they earned it. And that's why Texas A&M beating Arkansas at the SEC meet is such a big deal, because that's what got them the number 4 spot to begin with. Everybody else is going to have to go out and qualify. We're going to give a bid to every team that shows up to that regional and wins. But we're going to take 16 teams to the national meet, because the SEC conference has 16 teams in it. And I think it's safe to say they have the best conference championship across all of Division 1. So we're just going to keep that same energy. But to get to 16 teams, we are going to fill out the field with 3 more at-large bids. They're going to be the best teams that didn't win their regionals, but are the highest ranked teams between their SCA team ranking and their USTFCCCA national rankings, the rankings that we already have. Those teams, yes, you're going to make it into the nationals when it's all done. And using this model, we're not going to ignore all the top individuals. If you win your conference championship individually, even if your team isn't good, you still get an invite to the regional championship meet, where you can compete for yourself. You can go all region and even qualify for the nationals, just like we do in cross country. You could even go all American if you keep on going. So we'll get to watch you on TV. You just won't score points for your team. We'll give the point scores to the teams that actually showed up as full teams. I'd also give individual bids to the top 8 individual performers in any given region for that matter, as well as to the top 8 national caliber performers for the national championship meet. Once again, doesn't matter what region you're in. So all those athletes based on performance have a chance to compete for gold medals and All-American status. We're keeping that intact, but we still need to find the best team. So here we go. I don't have time to go through every team that's going to make it into this championship bracket. Remember, every conference champion, as well as a whole bunch of at-large bids, are going to show up. But I'm going to go region for region and tell you, based on odds and percentages and some random chance, who might actually survive to get to the national meet. We already know who the top seeds are on the men's side. It's Arkansas out of the South Central region, Texas Tech out of the Mountain, USC from the West, and Texas A&M also from the South Central. Every single team either won a conference championship or went number 1 in their region or did both. The only ones who definitely couldn't do both were Texas A&M and Arkansas, for obvious reason, they're in the same conference. And the additional at-large bids will go to the following schools: New Mexico out of the Mountain West, Penn State out of the Big Ten, and UNC out of the ACC. So who's going to join them from each region going forward? First we get Indiana out of the Great Lakes, surviving to represent for the Big Ten. And we also get Princeton out of the Mid-Atlantic, because, well, they're going to prove why they are the best team in that region when that meet goes off. Oklahoma State would likely survive the Midwest, and BYU would also survive the Mountain. So the Big 12 is looking pretty good right now. Remember, there's some random chance in this about who's getting out of these regions. But Harvard out of the Northeast would be the second Ivy League school to survive and advance. And this one was not necessarily a lock, because UConn's going to give them a run for their money. But the Florida Gators out of the South region, the same Florida Gators who really didn't do all that well at the SEC Conference Championship, would still survive and advance to get to the NCAAs. Hey, that's why they call it March Madness. But the most shocking thing when I ran the numbers is that there was a chance that Little Rock, out of the South Central region, Arkansas Little Rock, I'm not making this up, out of the Ohio Valley, they could make the national championship meet now as a team in this structure. I do admit it certainly helped them out a whole lot that 2 of the teams in their region got at-large bids to the nationals, which opened up a spot for somebody else, but they'll still have to go out and put up numbers. And the final 2 teams are Virginia out of the Southeast and Washington out of the West. That is the national championship field. And when all of those teams battle it out in a team national championship structure, because yes, teams like Auburn, they were in the regionals, they just didn't make it out to the nationals. Their best athletes will, and you'll see them on TV running past everybody, especially in the sprinting events, but they ain't gonna be scoring for their team anymore. They're competing for All-American status and medals. That's about it. And when the dust settles, when all those teams battle it out in the nationals, these would be our top 3 spots. Texas A&M would finish 3rd to prove they are still legit. But UNC, likely behind their incredibly elite distance runners, they would sneak past them, perhaps for this number 2 spot. And the number 1 team in the nation is still the same one it was always supposed to be. The Arkansas Razorbacks. They would win the national title. So what all of this tells me is you can introduce a whole bunch of madness into college track and field, let the teams battle it out. I mean, hey, scheduling wise, you just move the conference meets back a little bit because the earliest conference meets were about a week or 2 before the latest ones. Just make everybody go on the same week, and then we have time to do the regional before the national. And it's a very clear structure because who wins the conference meets gets an automatic bid, and on top of that, the exact same rules for the conferences are the exact same rules when you show up to the regionals, and it's the exact same rules when you show up to the nationals. We don't keep changing the structure about who qualifies, and so we're not doing that anymore. If your team is legit, then your team is legit, and we're handing out a national title after all of it. On the women's side, 17 teams that rank among the top 25, pound for pound, are from the Power 4 conferences. That alone is not really a shock if you know the details of how college recruiting works, specifically for women's track and field. But I was surprised that the Big 12 only had 2 teams that made it that far, albeit those teams were inside the top 10. The ACC was next with 3 teams, and the Big 10 came back with 5 of them. But when you get to the SEC, they proved why they are who we thought they are. They have 7 teams inside the top 25. I'm not making this up. And remember, there are still about 30 conferences in Division I track and field represented. So amongst all the other conferences, these are the teams that actually showed up as some of the best in the nation. Montana State goes number 25, but Northern Arizona cracks the top 10. That's how they represent for the Big Sky Conference. Because believe it or not, NAU is not just a distance program. They have a complete team. But beyond that, the Big East also comes back with 2 teams, because Georgetown and UConn prove they are among the nation's best. But perhaps the biggest shocker to me is when Howard out of the MEAC conference finished number 14 on the team rankings. They dominate across their region for the most part and took care of business in the conference. Remember, these rankings are based on who did you play and who did you beat. So yes, if we're going off of that logic, that would get them this high. And before I get to the top 5, I've got to let you know this part. The Ivy League, the same conference that doesn't like to give scholarships at all, had Princeton and Harvard both go top 10. They went number 10 and number 6 respectively, which means you really don't want to see either of those teams show up if you've got to battle them in a dual meet. Among the top 5 are basically the usual suspects. It all starts with Illinois at the number 5 spot, a team that takes care of business in the Big Ten as well as in their region. But unfortunately for them, Oregon is now also in the Big Ten, even though they're in another region, and they get the number 4 spot. Keep in mind, it's the exact same order they finished at the Big Ten Conference Championship meet, just saying. But BYU gets the number 3 spot behind their talented distance runners. And yes, they're in the Big 12 Conference. Same conference with Texas Tech, who edged them out for the number 2 spot, who did the same thing at that conference meet. But when the dust settles, the reigning NCAA champions and now defending SEC Conference champions again are the Arkansas Razorbacks. And they ran away with that conference title, which is why they are the number 1 team, and it's really not all that close. So after all that, if you invited all of the conference champions to show up and compete in their regions, with a bid to the national championship meet on the line, remember, individual athletes have an opportunity to qualify through to a regional and eventually to the nationals. They can become All-Americans and all that. But if you can't bring your team with you, you ain't scoring points anymore. The teams will score points, and that's who gets the title. It would lead us to the following, which is a very interesting conversation about who's going to get the at-large bids, on the women's side. Because, of course, Arkansas is going to get the first one. They're the best team, and it's really not that close. And Texas Tech is number 2, so they're going to go with them. But I would actually skip over BYU, based off of their performance at the conference meet, and give it to both Oregon and Illinois. Because even though Illinois lost to Oregon, they were also number 1 in their region, because they compete in the Midwest. That opens up an additional regional spot to replace each of those teams, because those teams already have a bye now. But as for the remaining at-large bids, before we get to who's going to survive these regions, those teams are actually pretty clear. The next best teams with national polls and team rankings. So either way, BYU is still going to make the nationals when it's all done. But the Georgia Bulldogs are coming with them out of the SEC, and Stanford out of the West region, which is ironically now in the ACC. They would also show up. So the only remaining question is who are the other regional winners who are going to survive in advance to battle it out with them. And yes, because all the conference champions are now represented along with a whole bunch of at-larges, I'm going to skip over every single team and focus on who would survive in advance. And it all starts with the Great Lakes region, because Michigan State would shockingly, if you run the numbers and allow for random chance, they could survive the Great Lakes to get to the national meet, which was not supposed to happen. But that's why they call it madness. And Rutgers in the Mid-Atlantic, to a lesser degree, would do the exact same thing. Survive and advance to give the Big Ten another team in the NCAAs. And apparently Minnesota agreed with them, because once again, in the Midwest region, they would survive in advance to show up to the NCAAs. That is now 3 teams out of the Big Ten who survived their way and advanced, not including the ones that already had byes. But Northern Arizona out of the mountain region would do it for the Big Sky. They're showing up to the national championships. And UConn would take out Harvard, where they would get the bid out of the Northeast region. But the biggest shocker out of all of it is when Alabama State, out of the SWAC conference, when all the numbers are run and you allow for some random chance, they survived the South region to make it to the national championship bracket. So yes, that is the real reason why they call it madness, because you actually get some upsets. But LSU taking the South Central is the opposite of an upset. They just did exactly what they were supposed to. Virginia would take the Southeast, and California would survive in advance out of the West, which really wasn't supposed to happen, especially when USC is in front of them. But hey, it is what it is. You gotta go out there and run the races. And when the dust settles, and all of these teams officially battle it out for a national championship, the results would be the following. Because the Arkansas Razorbacks are gonna take care of business. They're just not gonna win the national title this time. They're actually only gonna get 3rd place, specifically if we scored it this way and allow for some random chance. The Oregon Ducks, however, would have a pretty good shot to hold on for the number 2 spot, doing it for the Big Ten as well as for the West region. And our brand new national champion, on the women's side for the first time, would be the Texas Tech Red Raiders, proving that they can do what the men did last year in this structure. The fact of the matter is that college track and field at its highest level is basically Olympic caliber. That's why there are Olympic athletes who are competing in college uniforms during this exact season. But the individual athletes represent teams, and we score them at conference meets when they go out there. But when those individual athletes show up to a national championship meet, specifically if they represent a team that didn't really come with them, I don't have a problem with them competing, becoming All-Americans, and even going for medals. I just don't think they should be scoring points under their team designation anymore, because the team really didn't come. In this model, only 3 of the projected top 8 finishers in the NCAA Women's 60 would technically not get scored under a team. Those points would have to go somewhere else. But if clear narratives and dynamic performances are really what you want in college track and field, then this is one way to get it. Because it doesn't get much simpler than win and you're in. And it also doesn't get any more pressure packed than win or go home. Because the track and field community definitely deserves to have nice things too. And that includes their very own March Madness. You actually made it all the way to the end of this video. I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if you want more from me beyond this video, on SCArecruiting.com, you can get a ton of resources, like my free recruiting guide, online courses, and much more, including the option to meet with me one-on-one, where my specialty is helping you figure out which schools might actually be the best fit for you. And if nothing else, and you really just want to see more content like this, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.